I know everyone here, so that's nice. No unfamiliar faces. So, like Venerable Jongdok said, the content is, of course, as you can see, about Korean Buddhism, but I'm quite interested to hear about your traditions in Sri Lanka or anywhere that you have been practicing funeral ceremonies, because, well, as you'll see, there was quite an influence from Chinese folk traditions, which are significant. So you'll see these differences as we go along. So I'd like to hear from you if possible. So you can see the temple, the title of today's presentation is Contemporary Some Buddhist 49-day ceremony. So that's the Sa Ship Gu, right? The 49 Je meaning the funeral ceremony, viewed through Joseon Dynasty ritual texts. So the texts that we did, first of all, this comes from a paper that was done by Professor Moon, who I was lucky to assist with. So he is quite knowledgeable about this and has done this ceremony frequently. So I was lucky to hear from him his direct experiences as well as the theory. So the theory does come from Joseon texts, but because this is about modern Korean Buddhism, we're talking within the last 100 years mostly. So it's the influence of Joseon texts, and you'll see what those texts are, more so than an introduction to the Joseon texts themselves. So how did they influence the way that the ceremonies are done today? And an interesting thing too is these ceremonies are becoming, or at least seem to be becoming, more and more popular. And we're wondering why are these becoming more popular? What's happening with these, not just with Buddhism in modern contexts, but with the particular rituals in modern contexts. So I'll talk to you after an introduction. I'll tell you about the texts that we used. And then I want to focus on just two things, which is the procedures, but also the functions, and the newer, perhaps, what will we say? I don't want to say perhaps less traditional, but the way that it functions now is at least different than it was, let's say, in the Joseon period or earlier. So you might wonder first, what is it? What is Sashipguje, or 49-day funeral ritual? It's a bit of a mouthful to say 49-day funeral ritual. So I'm just going to say 49J or Sashipguje, so you'll know what I'm talking about. Right? Hi, welcome. So essentially we're just talking about what happens when one dies, and not metaphysically, but what procedures do we do within the context of Buddhist ritual. So when one dies, the belief is that they exist in limbo, or if we're speaking from my Catholic perspective, it would be like a purgatory or something, some sort of in-between existence. I'm not alive and I'm not yet into the next realm. I'm somewhere in between. So we'll call it a limbo, or in Korean say jungyu, right, in the midst of, right, not yet gone through. And so what the practices or what the rituals are meant to do is to help the deceased to have a good rebirth, hopefully into the Pure Land, but that's not necessarily going to be the result. At the very least, we'll hope for a better realm than they existed before. Right? So a good rebirth. They counter the bad karma which one has occurred over their lives. Okay, that's fine. And that's going to be an important point because we want to kind of see how is karma being interpreted compared to early Buddhism and to Korean Buddhism and modern Buddhism. It's got a bit of a difference that we'll see here in a moment. A means of guiding one, which may include the transfer of merit, right? So the good deeds that I'm doing here for you, the spirit, I can transfer my merit to you to give you that good birth, that good rebirth, and to invoke the help of not only the Buddha but the Bodhisattvas as well. Particularly Gwanseum or Avalokiteshvara and Shittigarbha. These are the Jijang Bosar are the two more common ones. Okay, so the way that we in our essay, Professor Moon and I broke it down was through a send-off and a support. And because he and I, Professor Moon and I, are both interested in psychology and the grieving process and what we can do to foster well-being for ourselves and for our community, we also wanted to focus on support, the use of the ritual as a healing mechanism, essentially, right? So we'll talk about a send-off first, a means to ensure that the person, the spirit, goes to the Pure Land or gets a good rebirth, and then support and aid for the people who are alive. So one is for the dead and one is for the living, right? An aid for the bereaved to cope with the loss, particularly as a community, right? Particularly as a community. So just before we begin, this is the part I find interesting, especially because we have people from different traditions, both Mahayana and Theravada, here today. So a Mahayanist view of the afterlife was introduced to Korea after scriptures from Chinese folk traditions, particularly Taoism. We have here one influential scripture was that spoken of the Buddha on preparing the 10 Kings ritual for rebirth after 7 deaths. Bursan Yesu, Shibonseng Chir Kyong. So we can see then there's a fusion of Mahayana thought with indigenous indigenous Chinese belief, where early Buddhism would say something like karma is fixed. You have karma. When you die, that's it. The karma has been set and you are reborn based on that karma. So in other words, there's no gap. There's no 49 days. There's not even one day. It's instantaneous rebirth because the karma has been established through your life. However, introduced with the introduction of the 10 kings as judgments or denizens of hell, right? Or the judges of your karma, the karmic law gets a little bit looser. We can now have an opportunity to adjust the karma that we accrued over our lives and hopefully get a even better rebirth than we might otherwise have gotten. So karmic law is, we say here, subverted, which sounds a little bit negative, but I just mean the opportunity for a better rebirth is possible because the karmic law is a little bit softened. So in other words, the intermediary period comes into existence, whereas it didn't in earlier traditions. And with Korea in particular, there's other influences as well, which I'll only mention briefly. With Confucianism, shamanism, Japanese colonialism, and the modern era, we have several influences here. One, which I find interesting, is the concept of hyo, or filial piety, or the respect that we have for our elders, for our family, for the past ancestors. Interestingly enough, we have the sacred spaces like the temple being shared with our ancestors. So if you were to go into a temple, there are sometimes special places where you'll see photographs of people who have passed away, right? And they're sharing those spaces for rituals right inside the temples. Maybe not in the main hall, but on the temple grounds. Of course, shamanism has had influence. We might just call this folk tradition as well, but for our sakes, I'll call it shamanism here. Is the shaman acts as the mediator between the living and the dead, and that's what the role is of the officiant for the ritual, is to act for the bereaved and for that person who has died, and they are like a connection between the two, right? Between this world and the afterworld or the afterlife. So emphasis on resolving resentment and atonement is common, as we'll see. And also bathing rituals, washing rituals. I mean, cleansing and purity is important, as it would have been for shamanism as well. Japanese colonialism is very interesting and very important too. And this is because not so much that the Japanese Buddhism influenced Korea, but it caused Koreans to double down on their Buddhism. So or let's keep it strong, right, in the face of colonialism. So we'll see that several texts were written during the colonial period, let's say the 1930s, which we'll see here in a moment. And then, yeah, I'll show that to you now.
I heard that in English you just translate the show into filial piety, but I heard also actually English users or Western, they don't use the word filial piety.
No, never.
Strange
very strange.
In English word.
Definitely. So that's a really good point. Because I was asked that maybe with you, Sinim, we were at the office near Chungmuro, and one of the monks asked, how would you translate Jong, and how would you translate Hyo? And I couldn't answer either. I said, well, Hyo maybe is filial piety, but that doesn't mean anything to an English speaker. That doesn't, because there's just no good way of translating it. So I like to say something like, high regard, respect, and worship for family, especially the elders and the ancestors. Right? So we need a sentence in order to crack even just a little bit of what Hyo means. Yeah, very good point. That sort of idea of lineage too is not so strong with Western traditions. Not the same sense as in the East. And so in the modern era, of course, too, we'll see that compared to Confucian traditions, it's relatively convenient, the 49-day ritual. And there's been some conveniency and shortening of the rituals, which have been important. Also, the rituals have been delegated in some cases so that the monk can do it on behalf of the family. And in modern times, that's important. We might not have the option to go to the temple weekly due to our family circumstances or to our jobs or whatever. So that would be an important influencing factor as well. So some of these rituals or some of these manuals that I wanted to point out, the first one is, of course, the Joseon Dynasty, the exemplary examples of Buddhist rituals, so the Chakpop-Kikam. And from this we also get a manual of essential methods of Buddhism, the Burgyo, Bopyo-Kikam. But more influential for modern times are the texts written during colonialism, and then, of course, these currently used 통일법요집. So we have the Essential Compendium for Buddhists, written in 31. And this is important too because it was written not only in Chinese characters, but in Hangul. It was more accessible. People could get it. People who didn't read Chinese could still get the content, right? And then an updated version we see are the Book of Buddhist Liturgies. These actually sold out really quickly apparently, and so they had to be reprinted, I'm told. And at this time, that wouldn't have been such an easy task in the 30s, not like today. So the Seonmun was also very influential. And then we kind of have a consolidation of these texts into a more modern version, so modern that it's in the 90s even, 1998, the 통일법요집, which we can take a look at. So we have, I found a picture of the 작품 귀감, the 불자 필람, and the 성문 이범, and then of course what we use, the 통일 불교 성전. Okay, so this is the main part of the essay essay or the presentation is what the procedure actually is. How do people actually do the ritual? So we have 8 steps here, or 7, I guess I could say, but depending on your interpretation, there could be more or less 7 or 8 steps. Preparation, reception, purification, prayers for contemplation, making offerings, prayers for protection, performance of memorial rituals, and then the relinquishment. And I'll go through each one at a time to get an idea of what those are. So preparation, obviously this is just a translation to help us understand what it means. It should be 실현 in Korean, but which means to receive and then to lead. But we're translating it here as just preparing to get things started. Kind of a simple way of understanding it. So how do we prepare when somebody dies? This state symbolizes the official entrance of the deceased into the temple. First, I should note that once the person has passed away, once they've died, then they would go to their temple and request that this be done, usually within a couple of days. And then once that has been established, they'll say, okay, let's start on this day, and we'll do every 7 days for the next 7 weeks. So the first one then, we want the spirits to be able to enter the temple grounds. And if you've been to temples, I'm sure you have, you've seen the guardian deities who guard the gates, the entrance into the temples. We need to give offerings to them to allow the spirit entrance, right? So this could be done through tea ceremonies, for instance, what have you. So once this happens, let me just check on this. Yeah, it's standard to hold a 3-day funeral when someone dies in Korea, typically. I should mention that. If it's a non-traditional, a non-religious ceremony, they'll do, they'll have funeral parlors or funeral homes, right? Often attached to hospitals themselves, and then that process can be done. If then afterwards the 49-day ceremony is requested, then they would go on to do it then. Okay. So then reception, what does reception take care of? What does this mean? 대령. So 대 and 영 literally translated would be to face, but we're translating it here as to receive the spirit. So they come to us. The deceased passes through into the temple, passed by the guardians. And at this time, food is offered to Amitabha, and 2 bodhisattvas are called upon, 2 in particular are called upon and worship, the Avrakteshvara and Mahasamprapta, Seijibosao. And this is to reassure and to calm the spirit, encourage him or her to comply. So it seems interesting to me that we're talking about a spirit who is perhaps reluctant, or if not reluctant, scared or worried, and we have to say like, no, it's okay, come, you know, it's this is for you, this is going to benefit you. It's as if the spirit is unaware of what's happening, right? So the spirit almost is coaxed towards this wholesome rebirth because his or her bad karma causes confusion, right? That bad karma causes confusion, and it could pull them towards less wholesome rebirths. So the prayers are then to guide the deceased. Then next we have what we call purification, but it's actually guanyok. And this is roughly translated as to anoint and to bathe. So this is, I mentioned earlier, the bathing rituals that may have been influenced from more folk traditions of Korea. So at this point, toiletries like clothing are prepared and followed by symbolic acts of bathing the spirit. And this means to chant. We chant mantras, right? So some of these mantras would be the bathing mantra, the gargling mantra, which is interesting, and the face washing mantra. This is meant to clean away the bad karma that was accumulated, right? To symbolically clean away the bad karma from the past, from the life just lived. And then we have the prayers for completion. So prayers for completion, or traditionally as it's called, Shinjung Chakbop, which would be the rituals performed in the presence of guardian deities. This serves as a reminder that the guardians are around us all the time, in space around us, on the temple grounds. The Buddha's words are also to be believed in, accepted, and to be protected. So it invokes the guardian deities that protect the Buddhist teachings, and the prayers that the funeral rituals are completed safely without any obstacles. We want to have the best possible outcome that we can have. Yeah, this is a particularly good example of the intervening that I was talking about, the transfer of merit. This is, karma is not set in stone. We're intervening here to sort of adjust the potential for a good rebirth. Then we have making offerings, so goyang, or as it's traditional, bulgong, so making offerings to the Buddha. At this point, we're having prayers to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas both, particularly Jijang Bosal or the Kshitigarbha Bodhisattva. The invocation of Kshitigarbha is the main prayer that's used here, and it's been influenced by these texts. The text here, you see the Jijang Bosal Bonwan Gyeong. So the patron Bodhisattva of the denizens of hell, Kshitigarbha, enters into hell to save sentient beings. So that's why he's being invoked here. Right? He goes into hell to help those in need. In Korea, these ceremonies are usually performed in what's called the Myeongbujo, or the Hall of Darkness, I guess we could translate it, or the Dark Prefecture, the Hall of the Dark Prefecture. So I've gotten some pictures here. So you can see Jijang Bosa here, but also the kings. We'll see the kings in this hall as well. There's only 2 which appear, but we'll have 10 kings which accompany the Buddha, or the Bodhisattva, I should say. And just so you know, these particular pictures, the picture on the left is Yeongoksa, and the one on the right is Baekhyangsa. Okay, so the prayers for protection, as we've translated it, or the Jungdan Taegong. So the offerings of the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas are then taken back. We've done our rituals. And new offerings are made for the guardian deities who protect Buddhism and Buddhist teachings. And the guardians are asked then to protect the deceased to ensure a safe journey, much as before. 7th, we've called it the performance of memorial rites, or the Gwanum Shisik, the Bodhisattvas of compassion and bestowing food. Food here is prepared for the deceased to induce him or her to realize the Buddha's teachings. So like Kshitigarbha in stage 5, Avrakteshvara is focused on in stage 7. We can see here from the text, take refuge in Avrakteshvara Bodhisattva, whose great compassion relieves sentient beings in pain and difficulty. Right? Coming from the universal gate of the Bodhisattva. Now, this is a particularly important step, because typically we have the monk or the officiant standing up front and doing the rituals. In the 7th stage, he or she tends to step aside and give space for the family. So the family at this point, the officiant at this point takes a secondary role. So while reciting the ritual mantra, the monk will give the family the opportunity to speak directly with the deceased, right? And here they can express their emotions more thoroughly while doing prostrations, if that's what they want to do, before the pictures, right? I mentioned that they'll have pictures set up on temple. And this is quite significant regarding the psychological benefits of the bereaved. They have sort of a freedom to look inside, see what they're feeling, and express it, right? They can unpack their emotions. They can reflect in open dialogue with the deceased. And so the Lotus Sutra is borrowed from, in this stage, especially the chapter on the Universal Gate. So quite an important part, especially for our more modern interpretation. And then finally, the relinquishment or respectfully sending bongsong, letting them go. So a farewell to the deceased, as well as the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. Right? This includes the mantras for rebirth, for the highest levels of rebirth possible. So this also is significant for the grieving process, because the bereaved now get a sense of closure. Right? Okay, now it's over, now it's finished. And they've had quite a long time, 49 days, to come to grips with, or to come to accept the fact that this person has died, and now it's over and we're going back to normal daily life, right? So closure, very important. And yes, of course, hopefully enlightenment will follow, but at least a beneficial rebirth. Okay, so we've spoken about the send-off, and then the second part, the support. Support not only as an aids to help me as an individual with my grieving and my emotions, but also as a support for me and my family, because probably my family and friends are together at the temple, perhaps. But even more interestingly, for grieving as a nation, or grieving as a huge group of people, a collection of people, a national grieving. We'll see what I mean in a moment. There's several studies done on this. I've just taken two for the sake of time. One was done with just 10 people, with just 10 subjects. So in this case, there's an opportunity for emotional processing and the resolution of difficult emotions to get closure. And what you learned from this was that there are basically 3 steps through the process: the acceptance and coping with the death, the detachment from the deceased, which we saw in in stage 8, the relinquishment, and then we finally return back to daily life. So we have this sort of turmoil, and then we ease ourselves back into life. A new life. It's going to be new because the person is not with us anymore, physically not with us anymore, right? So in this case study, what was done was there were categorized the experiences that the individuals had during the Sashipguje, and then the psychological states that they experienced after the Sashipguje. So this was, in particular, this just happened to be 10 women who lost a parent within the last year, who also did the 49-day ceremony. So you'll see that I've mentioned, yeah. Generally, the common experiences were that they were feeling sorry, and what that means is that they sort of felt like maybe there was insufficiency in the way that they lived while the person was alive. So while the mother or the father was alive, they may have felt sorry for being a less than perfect child, something like this. And that also was felt as guilt, like I wasn't a good enough daughter. I'm saying daughter here because all 10 subjects were women. Gratitude for time spent together was experienced. Wishing, of course, for good rebirth, the whole purpose. Relived memories, of course, and sharing grief with family, an important part. Then after the program, I shouldn't call it a program, after the Sashipguje was completed, the psychological effects were feeling more relaxed and comforted. A relief for having done duty. I did everything I could for my mother or father to go to the next realm for a good rebirth, acceptance of the death, and caused reflection on morality. And I'll just give you one more example. There was a second study done, this was a little bit earlier, 2016, where experiences of the 49-day ceremony were as follows. Feelings of guilt, again, this is interesting, feelings of guilt for not being the best son or daughter or person that they could have been for the deceased. Sadness, of course, that person struggled so much while they were alive. Remorse or regret that they had somehow let down the deceased. These ideas of guilt and sadness and I let down the deceased, and these are new feelings to me, because any funerals that I've experienced in the Christian tradition, Catholic tradition, they've never existed. There's never been a sense of guilt that I could see, personally or in my family members. But that seems to exist repeatedly here. And I don't know if this is a religious thing, a cultural thing. I'm sure it's both, but that would be interesting to look at more closely. That why do you feel guilt after they died? Right? That's an interesting question. So intense grief, of course, that would be common amongst us. Comfort in knowing that the deceased has been purified, and then conversations had with the deceased, especially during the seventh stage, were particularly helpful, they said. So that was with the Gwanseum Bosa, they said, was particularly helpful in their healing process. Okay, so those are my two quick case studies that were done. I can give you the full reference at the end of the presentation. But now what I want to notice is, okay, it's helpful for people individually, it's helpful for families and friends, but it's also helpful on a national stage as well. So a platform for national grief. The functions as a platform for the outlet of collective suffering, including grief, anger, resentment, frustration, feelings of injustice, etc., etc. So it can even become a bit political at this stage. So a call for justice targeting institutions, including local district offices, police departments, ministries of interior and safety, etc. And I'll show you why. Most recently, we know about the Itaewon disaster in 2022. There was a lot of grieving, obviously, because over 150 people, young people, died. So there was a sense of injustice as well. There were political emotions, and these things came to the surface within the realm of the 49-day ceremony, which was also held publicly. So we'll see some pictures of those. But not only that, when former President Roh Moo-hyun passed away, they had the 49-day ceremony, and also during the Sewol ferry accident in 2014, they did the same ceremonies were done publicly. And that's interesting because we'll see here for the president, it was done here in a temple, but these rituals have also been done outside of temples, which is a modern interpretation. They're done out in public space. In the case of Itaewon, it was done right in the street, or next to the street where the accident happened. So here's one of those. Here's for the Sewol ferry accident. I'm not exactly sure where this is, but it's not in a temple, is it? It's in a public space. And here, this is in Itaewon, out, again, obviously not in a temple, in public space. So the conclusion then is that the 49-day ceremonies in modern times has a renewed interest, or at least we think it has potential to be very helpful for modern folks dealing with death individually, as families, and as a nation. So the psychological benefits, there's ample time for grieving and managing emotions. There's 49 days, there's nearly 2 months, which is more than the typical 3 days. Right? 3 days might not be enough to really digest the fact that somebody is gone, but I think we need more time than that. So in a typical Christian scenario, there's usually what's called a wake, followed by a funeral. And the wake is usually 2 days, and then the funeral is on a 3rd day. So again, be similar to Korean non-traditional funerals, it's 3 days. But then that's it. The casket is buried, the casket is put into the ground, and then nobody does anything again, basically, with the exception of maybe having a service dedicated to the person, like on the anniversary of their death, something like that. But it's a very short period of time, right? Really only 2 days when you consider the wake as being the most important part of the process. That's when people come and meet and greet and say, I'm sorry, and they maybe give you some money and they pray over the corpse and that sort of thing. So 49 days is nicer. You can do it once a week for 7 weeks, at least in the sense of digesting the pain. It's convenient, relatively convenient. So up until 1976, the official period of prayer, I guess, or reflection for the dead in the Confucian style was 3 years. And that seems just a little bit too long. So 3 days is too short, 3 years is too long, something in between. After 1976, there was an official statement made that said, let's reduce 3 years down to 100 days for the Confucian ceremonies. But 100 days seems like quite a lot as well, especially if it's daily. Every single day for 100 days seems like a lot. But over 49 days, there's 7 times. That seems more manageable, in our opinion. So just kind of a conveniency, even, right? There's a flexibility. The recent public observations were held outside of temples. There is also inclusivity, so non-Buddhists are welcome to observe, especially when we consider the public events. And what we would like to consider further is the opportunity for education on death. So when we mentioned in the 7th stage, where the officiant, the monk, sort of takes a secondary role and allows the bereaved to more openly express themselves, have a conversation with the deceased. That might also leave opportunity for education on death. We might have an even less formal time when people can sit down and think about what is morality and what does it mean when I'm going to die. This is just flesh and bone, which will eventually disappear. We can have open conversations, especially during that seventh step. That was during the Gwanseum Bosa mantras. And then also an opportunity for learning new tools and managing difficult emotions. We in particular have in mind like the benefits of meditation, the benefits of reflection and considering your own personal feelings and turmoil, coming to grips with what you're actually going through. And that also might be done during that 7th day. That seventh day when we do the prayers to Kwanam Bosa. So religion in modern times is becoming psychologized. There's no question about that, at least as we've seen it. Psychologized, also detraditionalized and demythologized. But we still see that the traditions and the rituals are existing, but they're mixing with this more modern take. So insofar as the 49-day ceremony has a twofold function, which is the send-off and the support, they're also accommodating the needs of modern people and maintaining tradition at the same time. So that's what we've come with, and we have some references here if you like. And I'm more than happy to share the paper or these slides with you if you would like. I can do Kakao Talk or email, whatever you prefer. And that's all I have to say. So thank you very much for listening.